So I want you to picture this. It is 2006, and an airline has just lost a passenger's luggage in transit.
Right, which, happens all the time.
Exactly. Normally, that is just your average frustrating Tuesday at the baggage claim.
Yeah.
Except in this specific case, this piece of luggage contained the highly advanced animatronic robotic head of the science fiction author Philip K. Dick.
I still can't get over that detail.
I mean, it is wild. Hanson Robotics had built this incredibly lifelike simulacrum of him, right? And they put it on a commercial flight to a tech convention.
Uh-huh.
But somewhere between the tarmac and the carousel, the author literally lost his mind, and they never found it.
Which is honestly the most perfectly, tragically poetic ending imaginable.
It really is.
Especially for a man who spent his entire waking life wondering if humans were turning into machines and if reality itself was just some cruel, elaborate joke.
Right, like his own paranoid fiction just manifested into the real world.
Exactly. It's like hyper-reality bleeding out of his paperbacks and infecting our actual timeline. Yeah.
And that bleeding edge, the line between what is real and what is a hallucination, is exactly our mission for this deep dive today.
Yeah, we have a massive stack of sources to get through.
We do. We are taking this stack of biographical texts, these philosophical treatises, and literary critiques that you sent us, and we are going to use them to map the mind of Philip K. Dick.
Which is not an easy task.
No, definitely not. But we are looking at a writer who underwent just one of the most staggering transformations in literary history. I mean, he went from being this impoverished pulp author, just churning out cheap alien stories to pay his rent.
Barely paying his rent, honestly.
Right. From that to a prophet of modern philosophy whose darkest paranoid nightmares basically became the aesthetic and intellectual blueprint for the 21st century.
Yeah, we are dissecting a man whose throwaway concepts generated over $1 billion in Hollywood box office revenue.
Which is staggering.
It is. And yet he spent a significant portion of his life unable to even afford library late fees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But to really understand the philosophical architecture he built, you can't just look at his later success. You have to look at the psychological bedrock he stood on from the very beginning.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we all know he spent his life obsessed with alternate realities and parallel lives, right? But that obsession didn't start with science fiction magazines. It actually started in the crib with the ghost of a twin sister he never really knew.
Yeah, this is such a crucial piece of his psychology.
Imagine living your whole life feeling like half of you is operating in a parallel timeline. Because his twin, Jane, died just 6 weeks after they were born prematurely in Chicago in 1928.
And that profound, that initial void is really the mechanism behind practically everything he ever wrote.
Really, everything.
Well, literary analysts actually refer to this as his phantom twin motif. It pops up everywhere. It's not just a sad backstory. It fundamentally fractured his ontological security.
Right. And then his parents divorced, and his mother took him to Washington, D.C., so his early life was already pretty unstable.
Exactly. From infancy, his subconscious was just constantly wrestling with the idea that existence is split.
Like there are two versions of everything.
Yes. There is the world you occupy, and then there is the shadow world where the other half of you is living.
That is so heavy.
It is. When your foundational experience of reality is defined by an agonizing absence like that, you develop this lifelong suspicion that the universe you are looking at is incomplete. Or, even worse, entirely fraudulent.
Which perfectly sets up his incredibly complex philosophical framework.
Right.
I mean, later on when he was briefly at UC Berkeley.
Right, before he dropped out.
Yeah, before dropping out because he couldn't stomach the mandatory ROTC training, and he had severe anxiety about academia. But while he was there, he devoured Plato.
Oh, he absolutely absorbed classical philosophy.
And he adopted this worldview that he called being a cosmic panentheist. I read that term in the sources we have, and my brain just sort of short-circuited a little bit.
It is quite a mouthful.
Right. Like, how does a guy living in suburban post-war America operate as a cosmic panentheist?
Well, to understand the mechanics of it, we really have to split the phrase in half.
Okay, break it down for me.
So, a cosmic means a literal disbelief in the physical universe.
Wait, a disbelief that the universe exists at all?
Exactly. He concluded that the universe as this material construct of concrete and gravity and matter simply does not exist.
Okay, and the second part?
Panentheism is the belief that the divine, or God, interpenetrates every single part of the universe, but also extends infinitely beyond it.
Right, so God is in everything, but it's also bigger than everything.
Yes. So you put them together, And Dick believed that the only actual tangible reality is God.
Okay, I think I follow.
And therefore, everything else, your coffee cup, the sky, the Cold War, your own physical body, is a localized mass delusion.
Wow.
He thought it was a projection forced upon human consciousness for reasons we just cannot comprehend.
That is, I mean, he effectively mapped out the architectural logic of the Matrix decades before anyone had ever plugged a dial-up modem into a wall.
He really did. He decided that empirical evidence is basically useless because human perception is just this closed-loop system feeding us a simulation.
But let me push back on this a little bit, or at least play devil's advocate for you listening.
Sure.
When a guy whose life is defined by the trauma of a dead twin and a fractured, bitter custody battle between his parents decides that reality isn't real,
Right.
is that just the ultimate trauma response? Like, did his pain break his mind, or did it actually give him a specialized lens to see through the illusion of the post-war American dream?
I mean, the brilliance of his work makes it almost impossible to separate the two.
Because they feed into each other.
Exactly. The trauma was the lens. He looked at the perfectly manicured lawns of 1950s California and he saw a theater set.
Right. It felt fake to him.
But what makes his philosophy so compelling is that it wasn't just some ivory tower thought experiment. He had to pay taxes in this simulation.
He had to buy groceries.
He had to eat. So he took this profound, terrifying belief that reality is a fragile hologram and he basically commodified it.
Right. He had to make a living off it.
Yeah.
Which leads to him selling his very first story, Roog, in 1951.
Yes, Roog is such a perfect starting point.
I absolutely love the mechanics of that story.
Yeah.
It perfectly demonstrates his ability to radically shift the focal point of reality.
Tell him about the premise, because it's brilliant.
Okay, so it's told entirely from the perspective of a dog. And this dog is completely convinced that the garbage men who come every Friday are actually these terrifying alien entities.
Right.
And the dog thinks these aliens are stealing the family's most valuable food, which the family has obviously carefully hidden away in these metal vaults by the street.
The garbage cans.
Exactly. So the dog is barking frantically to warn them, and the humans just think the dog is insane.
Yeah.
But to the dog, the humans are the ones suffering from a delusion. They just don't see the threat.
That story is just a masterclass in shifting epistemology. It establishes a recurring theme for him, which is that madness is entirely relative to the observer.
Who gets to decide what is real, right?
Exactly. By 1952, he was a full-time writer, just churning out content for magazines like Planet Stories and If.
Just grinding it out.
Yeah, he was completely trapped on a pulp treadmill. He was incredibly prolific, writing something like 45 novels and over 120 short stories during his career.
That volume is insane.
It is. But the genre of science fiction at the time was widely dismissed as just juvenile escapism.
Yeah, the sources make it very clear how agonizing that was for him. He was stuck in what they called the sci-fi ghetto.
He hated that label.
He desperately wanted mainstream literary success. So he spent the 1950s writing dozens of non-genre, relatively conventional literary novels.
And they went nowhere.
Right. The literary establishment just completely shut the door in his face.
Ew.
In 1963, the Scott Meredith Literary Agency returned a massive batch of his unsold mainstream manuscripts.
Oh, that must have been devastating.
Out of all those attempts, only Confessions of a Crap Artist saw publication during his lifetime.
The financial and psychological toll of that rejection was immense. I mean, even when he achieved the highest honors within his own field, like winning the Hugo Award in 1963 for his incredible alternate history, The Man in the High Castle.
Which is a masterpiece.
It is. But even with that award, he was still living in poverty. He was an award-winning visionary who actively complained that he couldn't scrape together pocket change for library late fees.
The juxtaposition there is wild. But out of that financial misery comes this fascinating, humanizing moment in his biography involving Robert Heinlein.
Oh, the Heinlein story is so revealing.
It really is. So Heinlein was a titan of the sci-fi genre, but ideologically they were on opposite ends of the universe.
Completely different.
Right. Heinlein was a staunch, military-minded conservative, and Dick considered himself this paranoid anti-war freak.
But despite that gap...
Yeah, when Dick was physically ill and getting absolutely crushed by the IRS, Heinlein, a man he had never even met in person, called him up just to boost his spirits. He bought him an electric typewriter and personally loaned him the money to pay off his back taxes.
And Dick's subsequent reflection on that act of generosity reveals a core tenet of his entire philosophy.
What does he say about it?
He wrote that Heinlein knew they were political opposites, yet he helped him anyway. Dick concluded, and I'm quoting here, That is the best in humanity there. That is who and what I love.
That is beautiful.
It really is. For a man who constantly doubted the physical reality of the universe, practical, unselfish human empathy was the only thing he considered undeniably real.
And I observed that dynamic. Him being ignored by the literary elites, starving, relying on the kindness of rivals. And I can't help but wonder if that mainstream rejection was actually his superpower.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the fancy New York publishers had bought his literary fiction, they would have assigned him editors. They would have policed his ideas to fit the strict conventions of 1960s realism.
Oh, absolutely. They would have watered him down.
Exactly. But because he was banished to these cheap paperbacks with spaceships on the cover, no one was watching him.
That's a great point.
He acted as this philosophical Trojan horse. He was smuggling these terrifyingly subversive questions about consciousness and reality right into gas stations and drugstores.
The Trojan horse analogy is highly accurate. And if we look at the cargo inside that horse, scholar Eric Carl Link actually categorized it into 8 major themes across his work.
We probably don't need to list all 8.
No, we don't, but the most crucial ones are epistemology, the android and the human, and the intersection of media, drugs, and madness.
Right.
Dick wasn't really writing about space battles, He was writing about ordinary working-class people trying to figure out if their own memories were real or implanted.
Let's dive deep into that epistemology for a second. Take a book like Ubik from 1969.
Oh, Ubik is fantastic.
You don't just have characters wondering if they're in a simulation.
Yeah.
You have characters who are existing in this suspended cryogenic half-life after a terrorist attack.
Yeah, they are literally frozen in a facility.
And they are experiencing their reality rapidly decaying backward through time. Like a modern television suddenly reverts into an old tube radio right in front of them.
The physical world is just regressing.
Exactly. And they have to solve the mystery of whether they're the ones who died in the attack or if their boss died and they're actually the ones still alive.
Ubik is so disorienting because it forces the reader to experience the breakdown of empirical reality right alongside the characters.
You never know what's real.
Never. It poses this terrifying question. What tool do you use to measure reality if the measuring tool itself is hallucinating?
Wow. Yeah, how do you verify anything?
You can't. And Dick's ultimate answer to navigating that chaos always returned to what we just talked about. Empathy.
Right, the Heinlein connection.
Exactly. He drew a hard philosophical line. A biological human being who lacks compassion for other sentient life is not an authentic human. To Dick, they are an android.
That is the entire engine-driving do android's dream of Electric Sheep, the book that obviously became Blade Runner.
Yes, such a pivotal work.
You have this post-apocalyptic Earth where real animals are nearly extinct. So people buy a robotic sheep just to maintain their social status.
Because taking care of an animal is a sign of empathy.
Exactly. And the main character, Rick Deckard, is a bounty hunter killing rogue androids. But he tests them using the Voigtkampf machine.
Right, and it's important to note how that machine works.
It isn't an intelligence test, it's an empathy test. It literally measures involuntary capillary dilations when the subject is presented with scenarios of animal cruelty.
What's fascinating here is Dick's complete inversion of the evolutionary ladder.
What do you mean?
Well, the robots in his work are desperately trying to become more human. They're trying to grasp the nuances of feeling and connection.
Oh, right. Well, the humans are going the other way.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the biological humans are becoming more mechanical, more bureaucratic. They are executing these androids without any remorse. He was completely terrified of the mechanization of the human soul.
Which feels violently relevant right now.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how we interact with social media feeds today.
Oh, it's a direct parallel.
We doom scroll past a horrific tragedy in one post, and literally 2 seconds later, we're laughing at a meme.
Yeah, we just disconnect.
We bypass human suffering for a quick dopamine hit. We compartmentalize our empathy just to survive the sheer volume of information.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, are we actively becoming the very androids Philip K. Dick warned us about? Are we the ones failing the empathy test every time we open a screen?
It is a chillingly precise parallel, honestly. And Dick understood that human beings need coping mechanisms when reality becomes too bleak.
Which naturally leads to his heavy reliance on pharmacology.
Exactly. Altered states, both in his fiction and in his personal life. Consider his 1965 novel, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch.
Okay, set the scene for that one.
So humanity is drafted by the UN to colonize these miserable, incredibly hostile planetary environments. It's basically a death sentence.
Right.
And to survive the psychological torment of this, the colonists chew an illegal drug called candy.
And the drug isn't just a physical high. That's the crazy part.
Right, it's not just euphoria.
It actually allows the users to collectively project their consciousness into these miniature doll layouts. They have these dolls named Perky Pat and her boyfriend Walt.
Which are basically futuristic Barbie dream houses.
Yes, and for a few minutes, all the colonists share a hallucination that they are back on a pristine, sunny Earth, living in a pure consumer paradise.
Notice the mechanism of the hallucination there, though. It is not an isolated individual trip. It is a shared collective projection.
Everyone is seeing the exact same illusion.
Exactly. Dick was deeply immersed in Carl Jung's theories of the collective unconscious and archetypes.
Ah, so they are tapping into a shared psychic space.
Yes, his characters tap into a shared psychic reservoir. But the tragedy is that to write these intricate, overlapping puzzle boxes of reality, Dick was pushing his own neurology completely past his breaking point.
He was working at a frantic pace.
Between 1960 and 1970, he published 21 novels.
21 novels in a single decade. And some of the most complex, mind-bending literature of the 20th century, just hammered out on a typewriter.
Right.
And he notoriously claimed in a 1975 Rolling Stone interview that he wrote virtually all of those books while completely wired on amphetamines.
He was burning his candle at both ends and basically throwing it in a furnace.
The physical and psychological toll must have been catastrophic.
It really was. By 1971, his fourth marriage had collapsed entirely.
He was married 5 times in total, right?
Yes. So he's desperate for human connection, he is financially strained, and he opens his home to this rotating cast of street kids and drug addicts.
Just anyone who needed a place to crash.
Exactly. His house became this chaotic, dangerous hub. And this directly led to the inciting incident that shattered whatever thin barrier he had left between his fiction and his reality.
We were talking about the November 1971 burglary.
Yes, the burglary.
Okay, so he comes home one day to find his house completely ransacked. His massive fireproof safe was blown open with commercial explosives.
Not just cracked, blown open.
Blown apart. And his personal papers, his manuscripts, his tax documents, everything is gone.
Yeah.
And the police investigate, but they can't find a culprit. In fact, the authorities heavily implied that Dick, in a paranoid, drug-fueled fugue state, might have blown open his own safe.
Just imagine the psychological horror of that scenario.
Well, it's a nightmare.
The authorities are literally telling you that you are the villain in your own narrative. The locked room mystery is inside your own mind.
He must have felt like a character in his own book.
That event unmoored him entirely. Shortly after, in early 1972, he traveled to Vancouver to be the guest of honor at a science fiction convention.
How did that go?
Well, he actually delivered a brilliant, highly cohesive speech titled The Android and the Human.
Okay.
But offstage, his behavior was dangerously erratic. He became instantly infatuated with a woman named Janice, declared on the spot he was moving to Canada, and basically alienated everyone trying to host him.
He just spiraled so fast. Janice leaves him, his friends ask him to move out, and then in March 1972, he attempts suicide by overdosing on potassium bromide.
It was a very dark period.
He survived, thankfully.
Yeah.
And he checked himself into Ex-Collie, which was his tough love rehab facility in Canada.
Right.
And eventually he returned to California. But the paranoia had mutated into a permanent fixture of his worldview by then. And we see this explicitly in the letters he started writing to the FBI.
Yeah, the FBI letters. It is fascinating to watch his political pendulum swing here.
And just to pause here and be incredibly clear to you listening, as observers mapping his mind, we do not look at these letters to the FBI to validate or condemn his politics.
No, not at all.
We are absolutely not endorsing any of these political views, left or right. We look at them purely to see a mind that is inherently terrified of authority, no matter where that authority sits on the political spectrum.
Exactly. So in 1972, he wrote the FBI accusing fellow sci-fi writer Thomas Disch of embedding covert anti-American ideology in his work.
He was just naming names.
Yes, and later he accused prominent Marxist academic Frederick Jameson of being a Warsaw Pact agent.
He even accused Stanislaw Lem, the incredibly famous Polish science fiction author of Solaris, of not being a real human being.
Right, he thought it was a committee.
Yeah, Dick told the FBI that Stanislaw Lem was a composite committee operating on orders from the Communist Party to monopolize public opinion.
He was completely trapped in a hall of mirrors where everyone was a hidden operative.
And his inability to trust anything outside of his own mind became the literal blueprint for his masterpiece of that era, A Scanner Darkly.
Published in 1977.
Right. It is this heavily fictionalized, agonizing eulogy for the friends he lost to addiction in the early 70s. But it is also a brilliant technical exploration of split brain psychology.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that book because it is structurally brilliant.
Go for it.
The protagonist is Bob Arctor, a narcotics detective working undercover to infiltrate a drug ring dealing a drug called Substance D.
Okay.
To hide his identity from his own police department, he wears a scramble suit.
Which is such a cool concept.
It constantly projects a shifting montage of millions of different faces and body types over his own.
So no one knows what he looks like.
Right. But because Substance D physically splits the two hemispheres of the brain, Bob Arctor's undercover persona literally forgets that he is the police officer named Fred.
That is insane. The left hemisphere of his brain is actively investigating the right hemisphere.
Yes. He is sitting there watching surveillance footage of himself, trying to figure out if he is the drug dealer he is supposed to be hunting.
It is the literary manifestation of the 1971 burglary, where he suspected he robbed his own house.
Exactly. He mapped his own disintegrating neurology directly onto the page.
But here is where it gets really interesting, though.
About the drugs.
Yeah. Dick always claimed that the amphetamines fueled the madness and the output of that entire era.
Right, that was his narrative.
But years later, he stated that his doctors told him his liver had processed the amphetamines so aggressively that the drugs never actually reached his brain.
I remember reading that.
Wait, let me just challenge that entirely. If he's churning out 21 puzzle box novels in a decade, and the speed isn't actually reaching his brain,
Right.
does that mean the drugs were essentially just a placebo? Was he just fueling a purely organic, manic genius, and his body was filtering out the poison while his mind ran at light speed completely on its own?
The implication of that is staggering.
Right.
It suggests that the labyrinthine complexity of Ubik and the three stigmata wasn't a chemical byproduct at all.
It was just him.
The genius and the paranoia were entirely, terrifyingly native to his own neurology. The drugs may have merely been a psychological permission slip to let his mind run completely wild.
That is wild. But he eventually got sober.
Right, he did.
But getting clean didn't stop the visions. In fact, removing the chemical noise seemed to just clear the channel for the most profound hallucination of his entire life.
Yes, the event that Dick simply referred to as 2374.
February and March of 1974.
Right. If everything prior to this was the preamble, this is the main event.
Let's walk through the exact mechanics of this inciting incident because it's so specific.
Right.
February 20th. Dick is at home, and he's recovering from an impacted wisdom tooth extraction.
A very mundane setting.
Very mundane. He's coming off sodium pentothal. The pharmacy sends a delivery girl to drop off his pain medication, which was Darvon.
Right.
He opens the door, and he's immediately struck by this dark-haired woman. But specifically, his eyes lock onto her golden necklace.
He asks her what the symbol on the necklace is.
And what does she say?
She tells him it's a sign used by the early Christians. Dick called it the vesicle Pisces, which was blending the Christian ichthys, the fish symbol, with the ancient geometric vesicle Pisces.
Okay.
But it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. As the California sun hit that golden pendant, it generated a reflection.
Dick described it as a pink beam of light that shot directly from the necklace into his eyes.
And this wasn't just some optical glare.
No, he didn't just blink and rub his eyes. He claimed he experienced an immediate, massive data dump of information directly into his consciousness.
It's like a download.
Exactly like a download.
Okay.
He suddenly understood the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, these highly advanced geometric constructs. He felt an alien, transcendently rational intelligence basically invade his mind.
Initially, of course, his rational mind tried to contain it.
You tried to explain it away?
Yeah, he blamed the sodium pentothal, he blamed the Darvon, he thought maybe his blood pressure was spiking.
Which is fair.
But the visions didn't stop when the drugs wore off. For weeks, he experienced a relentless barrage of hallucinations.
What was he seeing?
He saw abstract modern art paintings projected in his living room. He saw ancient Rome literally superimposed over 1970s California.
He claimed he began living two parallel lives simultaneously.
The phantom twin motif strikes again.
Exactly. In one reality, he is Philip K. Dick, a sci-fi writer in Orange County. But in the exact same physical space, he is Thomas, a persecuted Christian hiding from the Roman Empire in the 1st century A.D. He is experiencing both timelines overlapping, like a double-exposed photograph. And the intelligence feeding him this information, he named it Valus, the vast active living intelligence system.
He came to believe Valus was a satellite, or an alien intelligence, or perhaps God itself, utilizing plasma to beam information into his cerebral cortex.
Sounds like a total psychotic break.
It's very easy to dismiss it as a total psychotic break, but the mechanism of this hallucination introduces a detail that makes it extremely difficult to simply write off.
The medical diagnosis.
Yes, the pink beam started diagnosing medical conditions.
During one specific transmission, Valus informed Dick that his infant son, Christopher, had a severe, undiagnosed right inguinal hernia that had burst and was highly lethal.
And the baby was showing no symptoms.
0 symptoms. But Dick and his wife rushed the completely symptomless baby to the doctor anyway. They demanded tests based entirely on a hallucination.
And what happened?
The doctors found exactly what the pink beam predicted. They rushed the child into surgery, and they saved his life.
That is the epistemological breaking point.
How do you explain that?
You can't. When a hallucinated voice gives you actionable empirical data that saves your child's life, you can no longer comfortably classify it as a mere delusion.
Right.
For Dick, the pink beam became the ultimate, undeniable proof that the physical universe was a simulation, and someone on the outside was hacking the code to talk to him.
He also experienced these terrifying literary synchronicities around the same time.
Oh, with Flow My Tears.
Yes. He had published a book called Slow My Tears, the policeman said, which is about a TV star who wakes up in a dystopian police state where all records of his existence have been erased.
Okay.
But years later, his Episcopal priest points out that an incredibly specific, long sequence in the novel involving a police general is almost an exact, verbatim retelling of a story from the biblical book of Acts.
And Dick swore he had never read the book of Acts in his life.
Never read it. He came to believe he wrote the book through automatic writing, guided by the spirit of the prophet Elijah.
He was a man completely drowning in the synchronicities. He desperately needed to build a raft.
So what did he do?
Well, from 1974 until the day he died in 1982, he undertook perhaps the most obsessive philosophical quest in modern literary history.
The exegesis.
Yes. He sat up late into the night, handwriting his attempts to logically deduce the nature of the universe and the identity of Valus. This massive project became known as the exegesis.
And calling the exegesis a journal is like calling the Pacific Ocean a puddle.
It is massive.
It is an 8,000-page, 1,000,000-word manuscript of pure, unadulterated ontological panic.
That's a great way to put it.
It is full of diagrams, philosophical musings, theology, and cybernetics. And the core hypothesis he lands on is absolutely staggering.
About time.
Yes. He concludes that time is an illusion. Specifically, he decides that history literally stopped in the year 70 AD.
He posited that the empire never ended.
What does that mean in this context?
According to the exegesis, the Roman Empire was the ultimate manifestation of materialism and spiritual enslavement, what he termed the Black Iron Prison. To trap humanity, the empire cast an illusion over reality, making us think we are progressing through time. You know, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the 20th century.
But none of it is real.
Right. In reality, it is always the first century, and we are always trapped in the Black Iron Prison.
Wow.
The Gnostics, the early Christians possessing true spiritual knowledge, were forced underground, just waiting for the hologram to shatter.
And he believed Valus was the thing shattering it.
Yeah.
He genuinely believed that the political turmoil of the 1970s was the cosmic war breaking through the simulation.
Which brings us to Richard Nixon.
Yes, he thought Richard Nixon was literally the Emperor of Rome incarnate. And he believed that Valus was anonymously manipulating the minds of investigative journalists and politicians to induce the Watergate scandal and force Nixon's resignation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely explains his radically shifting, almost chaotic political evolution.
It really does.
We noted earlier that he attended Communist Party meetings in the 1950s, which earned him a visit from the FBI.
Right.
Then he swung to the right, becoming staunchly anti-communist. He protested the Vietnam War by refusing to pay federal taxes, which resulted in the IRS confiscating his car.
Yeah, he was all over the map.
And then in 1974, he wrote a highly controversial anti-abortion and anti-Malthusian short story called The Pre-Persons, which drew intense backlash and death threats from feminists.
And again, I have to jump in just to remind you listening, we are simply mapping out how Dick's extreme skepticism manifested. We are absolutely not endorsing any of these left-wing or right-wing views.
Absolutely not.
But his political compass looks completely broken if you view it through a traditional left-right binary.
Right.
But if you view it through the lens of the exegesis, it makes perfect sense. He didn't care about the left or the right. He cared about the Black Iron Prison.
Everything was the empire to him.
Exactly. Any centralized authority, whether it was a communist regime in the Soviet Union, the IRS in Washington, or the medical establishment deciding who counts as a person, was just another tentacle of the Roman Empire trying to crush the individual.
Exactly. The term he used for himself was a religious anarchist.
That fits perfectly.
Modern anarchist scholars, like Margaret Killjoy, have noted that while Dick obviously wasn't out organizing labor unions, his intense Gnostic suspicion of all hierarchical power has heavily influenced modern anarchist thought.
He believed the individual was the only thing that mattered.
He believed that the only way to resist the empire was through radical individual empathy and a flat refusal to comply with the illusions of state power.
He spent a million words trying to map the exit to the Black Iron Prison.
And he ran out of time.
Tragically, yes. Just as he was synthesizing all of this, and just as the mainstream culture was finally catching up to his frequency, his own localized reality came to a sudden halt.
In February 1982, after completing a series of interviews, Dick complained to his therapist about failing eyesight.
That's a bad sign.
Very bad. He was advised to go to an emergency room immediately, but he refused. The very next day, he suffered a massive stroke in his Santa Ana home. He was found unconscious, taken to the hospital, and then suffered another stroke in the hospital that led to brain death.
Wow.
On March 2nd, 1982, he was disconnected from life support at the age of just 53.
And the geography of his burial is just the final heartbreaking twist of the knife in his story.
It really brings everything full circle.
It does. His father took his ashes back to Fort Morgan, Colorado. He was interred in Riverside Cemetery, right next to his twin sister, Jane.
The twin he lost as an infant.
Yes. When she died 53 years earlier, her tombstone had been engraved with both of their names. A completely blank space had been waiting for him his entire life on that stone.
The phantom twin finally pulled him over to the other side.
The closing of that loop is profoundly moving. But the cultural tragedy is the timing of his death.
The timing is just unbelievable.
Philip K. Dick died exactly 4 months before the theatrical release of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner.
So cool.
He died in poverty, right on the absolute precipice of becoming the most lucrative foundational architect of modern science fiction cinema.
Blade Runner changed everything.
It did. And the craziest part about the production of that movie,
Yeah.
Ridley Scott proudly admitted he had never even read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep before making it.
Wait, really? He hadn't read the book?
No. He found the book too dense. He just took the aesthetic concepts and ran with it.
That is incredible. And yet, when the studio brought Dick in to screen a 20-minute reel of the special effects before he died, you know, the neon-drenched, flying car-filled Los Angeles of 2019, Dick was astounded.
He loved it.
He turned to Ridley Scott and said it was exactly what he had seen in his own head all those years. He felt that his entire life's work was justified and completed by that visual translation.
He finally saw his internal hallucination rendered external and undeniable.
He really did.
And once Blade Runner cracked the code, Hollywood just strip-mined his brain.
Oh, complete.
We got Total Recall, Minority Report, A Scanner Darkly, The Adjustment Bureau, the television adaptation of The Man in the High Castle.
Yeah.
His Paranoia became our popcorn entertainment, literally generating billions.
But the academic world caught up too, finally.
Right.
Marxist critic Frederick Jameson eventually crowned him the Shakespeare of science fiction. But I think the most terrifyingly accurate assessment comes from the French postmodernist philosopher Jean Baudrillard.
Tell me about Baudrillard's take.
Well, Baudrillard utilized Dick's work to explain his concept of hyperreality.
Okay, what is hyperreality?
In traditional classical science fiction, you always have a baseline reality. You go into the holodeck, you have a wild adventure, and then you step back out into the real world.
Right. There's a clear boundary.
You have a clone, and you have the original. But Baudrillard pointed out that in Philip K. Dick's universe, the original has completely vanished.
Just really hammer this thought experiment home for a second. In a PKD universe, you don't step out of the holodeck. You step out of the holodeck, you go home, you kiss your wife, you look in the mirror, and you realize your memory of stepping out of the holodeck was actually implanted by the holodeck.
Exactly. The simulation is impassable.
The double has disappeared because absolutely everything is the double. You're always already inside the illusion.
That is hyperreality. The map has entirely replaced the territory. And Baudrillard argued that Dick wasn't just writing fiction, he was writing a documentary about the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
He is predicting our world.
Dick anticipated a world where media, politics, and consumerism would create a simulation so incredibly dense that the concept of an objective truth would become entirely obsolete.
Which brings us right back to the Hanson Robotics head, sitting in the lost and found of some airline terminal.
It is almost too perfect.
The man who spent his life terrified of machines mimicking humans was literally turned into a machine and then discarded by the bureaucratic incompetence of a massive corporation.
You cannot write a more fitting epilogue.
You really can't. So what does this all mean for us? We've mapped the mind of a man born into the trauma of an empty crib, starved by the literary elite, propelled by amphetamines and pink beams, who ended up architecting the anxieties of the digital age.
I think it means that Philip K. Dick was basically the canary in the coal mine of human consciousness.
That's a great way to view him.
He possessed this hypersensitive neurology that picked up on the frequencies of technological alienation, surveillance capitalism, and institutional paranoia decades before the actual infrastructure for those things even existed.
He saw it coming.
He recognized that the ultimate battleground of the future wouldn't be outer space, It would be the integrity of our own minds.
He took the muddy, chaotic waters of his own fractured psychology and used them as ink to draw the future.
He truly did.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We look back at Dick's life. The paranoias, the frantic letters to the FBI, the belief that the Roman Empire is projecting a literal illusion over California, and it is so easy to safely categorize him as just a brilliant but broken man.
Right.
But look at the screen you're holding right now. Think about the world we have actually built. We live in an era of generative AI pumping out synthetic articles, deep fakes that can perfectly mimic the voice and face of your loved ones, and algorithms designed to feed you a customized, closed-loop version of reality that only confirms your existing biases.
It's all happening.
We are willingly strapping virtual reality headsets to our faces just to escape the physical world. So have we actually built the exact simulacra Philip K. Dick hallucinated?
It's a terrifying thought.
The next time you interact with a screen, the next time you trust a digital map to reroute your physical life, ask yourself, are you the authentic human in the story? Or are you just a localized node in someone else's vast active living intelligence system? The concrete under your feet might not be as solid as you think.
A profoundly unsettling question to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the concrete.